Welcome to this overview of the Landscape Management Network's software package for landscape contractors. Here we're going to take you through a 10,000-foot view of what our software does and how it helps landscape contractors improve their profitability and their business savvy. First, just a minute about us. We actually own and operate one of North America's top 100 landscape companies out of Toronto, Ontario. We grew the company from startup into what it is today, but along the way we quickly realized that running a landscape company was a whole lot different than working in the field in a landscape company. Most of us grow up in the trade, learning the trade, and being really good at what we do outside. But when it comes to running the business, a lot of what we do is new and unfamiliar, and sometimes we're not even that good at it. So as we grew TBG, we quickly realized that as we grew in people and as we grew in size and sophistication of our projects, our systems, the things that run our business, needed to keep up with us. And along the way, we started developing LMN. And about 6 years ago, LMN became what it is today, a software package released to the landscape industry that helps improve budgeting, estimating, project tracking, payroll for staff, and a myriad of other things. Essentially, it's the tool that helps us drive the business end of our landscape company. So we'll guide you through some of the key components of the system and explain what they do and how they help. And at the end, if you have any questions, make sure you email us at support@golmn.com and we'll be happy to answer them for you. We'll go in the order that LMN was designed to work in. And it starts from a budget. You can't hope to price jobs or figure out what you should charge on jobs if you don't know what it's going to take for your company to make a profit at the end of the year. Your budget can tell you so much information about your company, not only about how you should price work, but how you should pay your staff, and whether you have enough to buy equipment, and how you're going to recover the costs of that equipment. And do you have enough, too much, or too little overhead on which to grow your company? So we started there at the budget level to help ourselves and other companies start each year from a plan for profit. As I go into the budgeting section here, you'll notice that I can actually create more than one budget for the company. This is useful for year-to-year budgeting so that I can keep my last year's budget but create a new one for this year. And for bigger companies, it also comes in handy if you want to create different budgets for different divisions. For instance, you could have an installation or construction budget, a maintenance budget, and a snow budget. A little more complicated and time-consuming to set up, but you could certainly set up each one to make sure that each one of the divisions in your company was running profitably. As I drive into the budget, I'm going to start with just some basic information, company name, year, and a budget name, so that I know the budget I'm looking at. Here I'm going to get into the sales forecast. And the goal of the sales budget is to create a plan for how much work we want to sell in the upcoming year. So we're going to use our profit and loss statements from last year to help us guide what our forecast should be. But your goal here should be to set a sales goal for your company, where you want to be at the end of this coming year. And the pricing, etc., that LMN is going to help deliver to you at the end of this process will help you get there. We'll come back to that later. Next, I need to set up my field labor budget. And my field labor budget includes the field staff, so foremen, laborers, lead hands, equipment operators, anybody who works hands-on on the job, and the cost of their wages. So here, as I set up a field labor budget, I'm going to enter my positions, the hours, the hourly rates on average that I pay these roles, and it will total for me a budgeted wage for each role. Now the goal here is to make sure I have enough, and not too much, labor to do the sales goal that I hit. So here I'm going to look at something called your labor expenses as a ratio to sales. And what this number is the percent of every dollar we earn spent on wages for the field staff. The lower this number is, the more productive my field staff is. It means they're generating more work per dollar paid in wages. The lower that number is, means my company is not as productive as it should be. And how do you know where the right percentage should be, or how do you know if you're on track? Well, that's where you can use our handy compare buttons. Using industry studies, we helped map out a profitable plan or benchmarks for where companies sit. So for instance, if I did 60% residential design build work and 40% grounds maintenance work, and I hit the compare button, it will give me a realistic average of where most companies in our industry doing a 60-40 mix of work would fall in. The suggested ratio would be that I would spend 28% of my sales on wages. The low ratio, which means profitable companies, are spending 25%. Companies in the low range are productive or more profitable than the average landscape company. Companies in the high range of labor are not as productive as the average. So high companies or unproductive companies would tend to be around 31. So it's telling me here you should budget on average for a 28% labor expenses as a ratio to sales. Good, efficient, profitable companies will fall around 25, and not so profitable or not so productive companies would fall in the 31% range. This will help me when I get to the end of the budget determine on which one of my costs are over budget if I'm not as profitable as I'd like to be, and I need to go back and make mistakes. It'll also set great benchmarks going forward in the year to make it easy for you to look at your QuickBooks or accounting package to say, what are my sales to date? What am I spending on labor to date? And am I on track to achieve the results I hope to achieve in my budget? Next up, and really importantly, is the equipment budget. We find one of the most often missed costs in estimating and in contracting is the cost of equipment. Just doesn't get recovered in the estimate. Our equipment gets older and older, and we don't have the capital to reinvest in new stuff. And as the equipment gets older, it breaks down more. And then the field staff become less productive because they're doing work by hand instead of with equipment. Our sales drop because we can't get work done as fast. Our overhead goes up because we're not getting work done as fast. The pitfalls of not managing our equipment properly are steep. So we want to make sure we have a plan to recover all the costs of our equipment expenses. And we'll start here in our budget by budgeting for our fuel, our repair, and our equipment insurance. And then down below, we get into the pieces or at least types of equipment we have. Now, all this entry of data here is explained in our help videos. And the purpose of this video is not to explain how to do it, just to give you an overview of what we do. If you drive into this help video, you'll get a 10 to 15 minute video explaining the exact contents of this budget and how to set it up, and what should be included and what should be skipped. For anyone going ahead after this and actually setting up these budgets, make sure you watch these videos. The numbers that go into the budget are going to become your foundation for pricing work. And if you put garbage numbers in, you're going to get garbage. So it's really important to take this seriously. Each piece of equipment has a little calculator to help you budget an amount for it. The calculators include the purchase cost, the number of years that you intend to keep the equipment, and the estimated value when you're done with it or ready to get rid of it and replace it. Down here, we've got a desired rate of return or inflation rate. And what comes out of the calculator will give you a monthly ROI or return on investment that you need to save in order to recover the cost of your equipment. So the goal of this is to make sure that in order to afford and replace this skid steer at the end of the life, I need to average at least $385 a month in cost recovery from my customers to make sure that I can replace the skid steer when I'm done with it. Well, as we get to estimating, we'll use this number to calculate an hourly or daily rate for the skid steer to make sure I'm charging skid steers and trucks and any other equipment properly in my estimates. As we move further into the budget, we need a materials budget. So per dollar of sales, we're going to spend money on materials to get that work done. The best benchmark for material budgeting is probably your own numbers. Look back over the last 3 years. See what your sales were and what you spent on materials in each of those years. Divide your materials by your sales to come up with your percentage spent on materials from sales. And over the past few years, you'll tend to find it's pretty consistent. That'll help you budget going forward. For example, if you spend 25% of your sales on materials on average over the last 3 years, there's a good chance you're going to spend 25% again going forward, unless you're really changing the type of work you do. But again, that's where the compare buttons come in handy. They'll help show you that if you did design build work, for instance, the average company would spend about 30% of sales on design build. Obviously, for a company doing grounds maintenance, that's going to be a lot lower. So if we run a compare there, we'll see the average grounds maintenance company spends about 8% on things like fertilizer, mulching, etc. And then as you get into splits, so as you do a mix of work, LMN will help guide you to where most companies spend in material spending. So if you really can't pull numbers from before or you're new to the industry, you can certainly take a look at previous studies to determine what you could or should be spending based on other companies' benchmarks. Driving in further, we set up a subcontracting budget, which will help you budget for subcontractors should you use them. If you don't use subcontractors, you leave this at 0, obviously. And then next, and most importantly, we're going to set up an overhead budget. And for most contractors, an overhead budget is one of the most foreign things. It's like this big cloud. We know we've got overhead expenses. You've got cell phones, and you've got rent, and you've got insurance, and you've got all kinds of expenses that are company expenses, but don't necessarily get itemized when you're estimating. So how do you make sure your prices are enough to recover all those overhead costs and deliver the profit that you need to make on each job? That's why you need an overhead budget. Here's where you're going to enter all your different costs for expenses that aren't included when you build an estimate. Things like bad debt, shop consumables, property taxes, uniforms, cell phones, insurances, software, computers, all the things that don't find their ways into estimates, as well as the wages for maybe office staff, or in fact, any staff that don't get estimated into jobs. Your mechanic, if you have one, doesn't ever get estimated in a job, but we need to make sure that our overhead budget is sufficient enough to cover his wages or her wages. So a mechanic, for instance, would be something you definitely put in here, as well as office staff who don't find their way in estimates either. Accountants, bookkeepers, HR staff, and often owners. When you're finished your budget, LMN will produce for you a profit and loss statement. Essentially, if all the things you just typed in happen in real life, we're going to show you how much money you can expect to make. And here you can see I've got a plan for 10%. And 10% is a reasonable net profit. If you put your plan in here and it comes back with a net profit of 1 or 2%, you know you need to come back and make tweaks to your plan. Something's wrong. You're spending too much of the sales that you're making. The point of LMN is to fix this first before moving on. You don't want to move on without a profitable plan. You want to focus here until you figure out a way to make a profit. And LMN will help you do that. If you're only making 1%, then chances are one or more of these ratios are over what they were supposed to be based on the benchmarks we showed you earlier, the compare buttons on each budget. So find the ones that are over. And that'll help you understand where your company's inefficiency lies. And that's the areas you need to focus on for improvement. When you're done your P&L, LMN also calculates for you an overhead recovery system. You can use a multitude of overhead recovery systems in LMN, but the important part is that you use at least one. Far too many companies in our industry are pricing work without really understanding overhead, or not having an overhead recovery system at all, meaning they're just guessing at pricing. And unfortunately for all of us, that means on average, we guess low because we're trying to win work. And if 10,000 was the right price for a job and somebody says 9,000 and I don't really know whether it's profitable or not at 10, then I might be very likely to go down to 9,000 because it seems if someone else can do it for 9 and make money, well, maybe I can too. Not understanding our numbers is hurting our industry as a whole as it brings everybody's pricing down because we're just competing on that low price. What we want to do is put together a budget here that then spits back for us an overhead recovery system to make sure that when you're estimating, no matter who is estimating, be it you as an owner or be it an estimator down the line who has no idea the contents of the budget, but you depend on them to come up with accurate pricing, this is the benefit of having an overhead recovery system. Method 1 is single overhead recovery and is a very simple overhead recovery system involving a single percentage. You could also use a field labor overhead recovery system, which recovers overhead based on the number of field labor hours you work. Or you could use one of the more complex, but arguably more accurate overhead recovery systems when you're getting into MORES, which is the multiple overhead recovery system, or DOORS, double overhead recovery system. LMN can handle any and all of these, and in order to get more information on those to find out which ones are right for you, again, you could watch our help video to see the pros and cons of each. The point is, at the end of the budget, you'll have a plan to make profit and you'll have a plan to recover your company's overhead when you price work. Now, for anyone at this point who's worrying, yeah, but I don't want my estimators to see all this information like other people's salaries, etc., that's perfectly fine, and we've taken that into account. You have security permissions to access the budget, and they're different than the security permissions required to build an estimate. What this allows us to do as owners is to build a budget, a plan for profit, with all our financial information put in there. Then we can turn it over to estimators who can't see this information, but who will use the resulting percentage markups to price their work to make sure that they're pricing jobs according to our plan. And that way, no matter who in my company is pricing work, whether it's an estimator who's been with me for 10 years or somebody who's been with me for 10 days, I know that the prices they're charging for our jobs are the right price for our company. Now, of course, estimators still have to be accurate when it comes to hours and material quantities, but that's what they get paid to do. At least the pricing or the financial side of it will be taken care of for you. So let's take the next step here and look one step beyond the budget. And that's about setting a cost and price database so that our estimators can estimate quickly and without fear that they're charging the wrong prices. So next up, we have what we call the estimating catalog. And you'll find that under the estimate setup menu. Once your budget's complete, now you can use that budget to help you price work accurately. First, you're going to set up your different crews. Now, you don't have to set up each crew individually, but you do need to set up your types of crews. Typically, a construction or installation crew gets paid a higher average wage than, say, a maintenance crew. And maybe an irrigation crew gets paid even a higher wage than a construction crew. So because each crew has a different average wage, it's a good idea to create each crew or each crew type separately. Start with the average wage per person, and you can figure that out manually, or you can use the calculator, which will link to your budget and allow you to pick the staff that you have in that crew, and it'll calculate for you the average wage needed. Then you'll have an overtime factor, which is described in the help, and there's also a spreadsheet to help you figure out your overtime factor. But this makes sure you recover the cost of overtime as well. Then there's an unbilled factor, and the unbilled factor makes sure that we recover all the costs of unbillable time. So you don't estimate every single one of the hours that your field staff work. In fact, they work a lot of hours, setting up in the morning maybe, cleaning up in the evening, cleaning up at the shop, washing trucks, etc. All these hours are hours that we spend on payroll, but don't necessarily ever get recovered in the estimate. So we need to make sure that we have this unbilled factor recovering the percentage of time that we don't ever charge back to our customers. Then you've got your labor burden, which is taxes and insurances on the wages. And then it reads your budget to find your budget's overhead markup and your budget's target profit margin. Both these are coming from the budget that you just created to make sure that on this crew, we're going to recover enough overhead and enough profit. And it's going to tell you right here what the hourly rate per man hour needs to be in order to make your budget become a reality. In this instance, at $43.83, I'll be recovering all the associated costs with the wages of the staff, plus the overhead my company needs to recover on labor, and plus, again, the profit margin that we want to make in order to hit the sales goal that we set back in the budget. So that budget that we created isn't just a pie-in-the-sky goal. That budget is actually a tool that not only helps us put a plan for profit in place, but it also gives us the foundation for a pricing system that helps us make that budget become a reality. At this price, we're covering all the costs of the overhead and profit in our company, meaning that if we charge this rate and we sell as much work as we expect to sell, you should hit the sales goal that you set forth in your budget. Next up, you have an equipment catalog. You want to make sure your estimators include the equipment that goes to jobs in their bids if you don't account equipment as overhead. So here, you'll get a equipment name and then a type, and down here, a calculator that'll help you figure out the cost per hour. So in here, I'm going to put the hours that my equipment works. Stuff like trucks is going to work generally all year. Stuff like skid steers or excavators may only work for a certain number of days per year, so that hours is really important. Then we're going to get into recovering the purchase price and the repair, the insurance and the licensing and the fuel, and we're going to roll that all up into one hourly and daily cost so that you or your estimators know exactly what they need to charge per hour or per day when estimating work. This will make sure that we're recovering the amount that we put back in our equipment budget from our customers, so they're paying for the equipment that they use. Next up, we have a material catalog, and this would be all the materials that we might use on a job. You're probably going to have hundreds of these, probably even thousands. You can add categories to organize your materials by category, or you could just import them straight. You can enter your materials one at a time, but if you can get your vendors to give you their price lists in a spreadsheet format, you can import these spreadsheets. So if you've got a list in QuickBooks or if you've got a catalog in a spreadsheet, import that into LMN, and you'll have all those materials created quickly for you, saving you hundreds of hours. Subcontractors are also a part of what we do. So there's a subcontractor area where you can set up subcontractor cost and pricing, or you can even leave subcontractor costs blank if they price work on a per job basis, but you can set the desired overhead and profit margin for your subcontractors so that your estimators simply fill in that sub's price on that job, and it'll automatically mark that price up, commensurate with what you want to make on that sub. And finally, we have an other catalog. And the other catalog is for things that didn't fall into any of these categories, typically equipment rentals, permits, maybe dumpsters, anything that you may not have included in one of the other categories. So now what we have is not only a budget that'll help us come up with a plan for profit, but a database of costs and prices that's going to make it really easy for our estimators to bid work. When they get to the estimating phase, all they need to do now is say, I need this crew for so many hours. I need this pieces of equipment or these pieces of equipment. I need this materials in these quantities. And then I need perhaps subs and others as well. And it will automatically tell our estimator, this is exactly what this is going to cost. This is what our break even on this work needs to be. And this is what we need to charge to make the profit we want to make to hit our sales goal. Now there's one other step that'll make it easy. What we've got now is a very detailed pricing system that'll help any estimator price work accurately. But we can take it even one step further and help estimators come up with the right calculations. If you go to Estimate Setup Work Area Templates, what these allow you to do is create groups of labor, equipment, and materials by work type. And you can set a whole bunch of handy functions here as well that allow estimators to estimate work very quickly and very accurately. So here, for example, I've got a template called a Paver driveway. And a Paver driveway is a great example of how you can use a template. Every paver driveway is going to need crews, it's going to need equipment, and it's going to need time and materials to excavate the base, to install the base, to tamp it down, and eventually to put stone on top of it. So here I've created a template that's got a crew, construction truck and trailer, skid steer, disposal bin, filter fabric, gravel, sand, edge restraint, polymeric sand, sealer possibly, everything in fact except for the actual paver itself, because the base of the driveway is the same no matter what type of paver gets put on top of it. So now I not only have a pricing database, but I've got a checklist for my estimators that anytime we're going to estimate a paver driveway, these are the labor, equipment, and materials that you need to think of. Maybe we don't need the sealer on this driveway. That's okay. We still put it in the template so that we don't forget it. And when the estimator is adding this template to a specific job, they can choose whether to include it or not include it, but at least they'll never forget it. Along with these materials and labor, we can also set up installation factors. So if you know you need 6 tons of gravel for every 100 square feet of the driveway, you can set that up here. So when it comes to estimating, all your estimators need to do is plug in the size of the driveway, and it'll tell them exactly how much gravel they need to order in tons. You could do the same for labor as well. If you want to set labor metrics in terms of how much you can install per hour, you can set up the exact same thing on the labor factor of this driveway. So for instance, I've got 1 labor hour per 11 finished square feet of driveway install. If those help your estimators with benchmarks, go ahead and use them. We don't strongly recommend sticking with fixed installation ratios because every job is different, but certainly that'll help new and inexperienced estimators get a sense of our benchmarks faster. On top of the driveway, you can also create a default customer description so that every time I drag and drop this template into a proposal, it'll automatically come pre-prepared with a description for my customers, for my quotes or proposals. These are changeable on each job, but at least my default wording can come included, and the estimators don't have to type all this in every time. Even more importantly, I can also set up default crew instructions. Lots of stuff we need to do a driveway isn't big enough to be put into the estimate. Grading stakes and pipes and screed board and shovels and rakes and brooms. These are all things that would never be big enough perhaps to put in an estimate, but I can't have my crews forgetting them when they leave for site in the morning. Each forgotten item is probably a trip back to the shop, wasting hundreds of hours each year in valuable production time picking up forgotten materials and tools. So you can set up a crew installation checklist here, and even an order of operations for installing pavers so that each time I use this template on a job, when I print my job planner for my crews, which is just another version of the estimate without pricing, of course, that'll explain to the crews exactly how much labor, equipment, materials we estimated, but also include those instructions for each work area so that crews are crystal clear what they need to have in order to get the job done with no mistakes. Let's jump across to estimating now and see how this all comes to life when you actually build an estimate. LMN estimates come in two types. There's standard or construction/installation estimates, and then there's service estimates. The simple difference is that standard estimates are built for construction or installation type work. It assumes we're going to go there once, complete the task, and then we're done. Service estimates have fields such as number of visits and whether things are billed as per visit, and in the assumption that we're going to go back and repeat this service a number of times throughout the year. Let's take a quick look at a standard estimate now to see how one's put together. Here I've opened an estimate for Chuck and Denise Neville, and they live at this address. Right off the bat, there's a couple of handy tools in the estimate. One is a measuring tool. The measuring tool will jump to a map of that property, which will allow you to do overhead site measurements. So if you're doing mowing or snow plowing work, you'll certainly be able to drag and drop and put your points down on an area. And down here in the bottom right, it'll spit out for you a measurement of that property based on the area you selected. If you want to get really detailed, you can zoom right in and drag these little points around so that you can get very accurate in your property measurements. We use Google Earth for our property measurement tool, so the measurements are highly accurate and trusted by millions. Back here on the estimate now, you can click here to generate a roadmap to the site, handy for printing out for your crews before they leave the shop so they can find the address in a hurry. Down here you've got a date, project name, and an ID number, which is a unique estimate ID number that you can either create or let LMN create it for you. You can have a drawing version number in case you've got multiple versions of a drawing or estimate that the client is choosing between. Here you can also set up your own custom list of estimate statuses, meaning you can track the status of each estimate in your company. Estimation phase might mean I'm currently estimating it. Lost means we didn't win the bid. On hold means the customer wants to come back later and maybe make a decision next year. And then of course I could have things like in progress or sold or pending or complete. You can also create your own list of estimate statuses and put them in your own customized order so that you can track what estimates you have in the sales pipeline and what status they're currently at. Down here, I'm going to get the estimate summary, which is going to break down all the financials of the estimate. It's going to show me the budget I'm using, the overhead recovery method I'm using, how that overhead's being recovered on this bid, and then all kinds of information about the cost of goods, the gross profit, the overhead that's being recovered, and then our ratios of labor, equipment, materials, and subs. Really important here is a ratio called revenue per hour, which is how much total revenue this job is earning per man hour estimated. Basically, we take the total price of the job and divide it by the number of man hours in the job. The more revenue per man hour you're doing, the more sales you're getting for each person in your company. And the better the revenue per hour, the more likely I am to be excited about winning the job. Moving down here, I get to the work summary, and this is where all the pricing magic happens. First, you probably want to create subtotals for your customers. If it's a small job, you may only need one work area. But if you have a larger job, you may want to break the estimate down by sub areas. In this case, I have a large, almost $100,000 job. So I've broken it down by back patio, swimming pool, garden, and backyard lighting, giving the customer a subtotal price for each area. Now, how did I get those prices? If you click the edit button, here's where you're going to add the labor, the equipment, the materials, and the quantities. And you can set their costs if it's different than your database defaults in order to come up with the price that you need to charge. Don't forget, once the estimator quantifies all these materials, LMN will use your budget to automatically add the right amount of overhead and profit in order to be in line with your sales target. Here's how one might get built using one of the templates we built earlier. Let's say I've got an estimate here for this customer, but I also want to give them an option for the back patio using a more expensive paver. One thing you can do is add work, and then here in the name, say back patio, premium paver. The cost code is the QuickBooks or accounting cost code I'm going to use to track my profitability on this job. More on that in the QuickBooks section. When I hit add, I've created this new back patio as a new work area in this estimate, but right now I have no costs associated with it. So the man hours and cost of goods sold and price is 0. I need to add some costs in here to get to totals. So if you're building an estimate without a template, you can click add labor, and up here will come the list of crews from your pricing database. The estimator simply picks the crew that's going to do the work, identifies the number of man hours needed to do the work, and then can move on to things like equipment, and then materials, and so on and so on. Before they add it to the bid, they'll come over here and they'll identify the quantity of each one of these, and then press OK to add it to the estimate. However, I want to use templates in our example, because templates can show you how fast and easy it is to build an accurate estimate. Here I'm going to go to Work Area Templates, and I've already created a Paver Walkway template. When I add that template to my bid, all the different elements of a Paver Walkway get moved over here to the right-hand side. Once again, this is my estimating checklist. Now, as an estimator, I've got here a list of all the different labor, equipment, and materials I need to think of when I'm building this bid. Here I'm going to put in the time I estimate, the number of days of truck and skid steer, whether I need a disposal bin, filter fabric, and then here I can get into coming up with quantities by using the calculator button. So if I've got 600-foot patio I've got to estimate, here I'm going to click the calculator, type in the square footage, and then it'll tell me how many ton of aggregate I need. I can do the same for brick sand if I've used a calculator here as well to come up with a different ratio, obviously less brick sand than I would need gravel, but a different ratio for the brick sand based on my needs as well. And then again, my edge restraint might be based on not square foot, but linear feet, and that's okay. Each material in your template can have a different calculator. So this one, for instance, is 1 spike per 1.25 linear feet. So if I had 80 linear feet of edge around this patio, it would tell me I'd need 64 spikes. I'll finish my estimate here. And maybe I don't need the sealer, so I'm going to take that out. Before I click, let's go to materials and add the paver we want to use. Now this is a more premium paver, so I'll go there and add this in. I'll put in my square footage, including some waste, and I'll hit OK. And now that'll automatically drop in here into my estimate with all the quantities, the units, the costs as normal, and then the price I need to charge. Something showing up in red here though. Notice that I'd entered a paver, but I'd never entered a cost. By showing up in red, it alerts my estimator that there's probably or there's likely a mistake here. My eyes jump here, and I realize I've forgotten the cost of this paver. So now I plug in the paver cost for my vendor. It fills this out, and now I've got an accurate price for this area. So now I've got my back patio or back walkway complete with my premium paver, and I'm ready to show the bid to my customer. Up here, I go to Customer Proposal, and I can hit Print. The printout opens in Adobe, which allows me to easily open it and send this as a PDF. I can either print it right here, I can save it to my computer, or I can even email this directly to my customer. Here in my descriptions, I've got my client information and introduction, and then I've got for each work area a price and a list of customer notes. Now remember, when we built that back patio premium paver, I didn't even bother entering a client note. The note came from my template, so it's automatically been done for my estimator. You can also set up standard terms and conditions for your estimates. So things like your acceptance of work clause, your payments terms and conditions, and your exclusions, you can include all this in your proposal so that they automatically come out. Your company logo and company information can also show up on your proposal by uploading it to the company information section. Now my estimators delivered an estimate, and they're 100% confident in the pricing because the pricing has come from the quantity and cost of each item, added on top of that the overhead and profit that we need to recover. And my estimator didn't need to worry about the prices that were being charged. They're automatically calculated again using our database, which uses your budget to make sure there's enough overhead and profit in on every job. Just looking at the summary information for this job, my estimator knows this backyard and pool is going to cost us $77,000 to create. We've got $15,000 of overhead we need to recover on this job, and therefore the break even is about $93,000, which means I can't possibly go less than $93,000 on this job and hope to make any money or even cover our basic expenses. So we need to get at least $93,000 to break even. Anything over and above this is profit. And now I know exactly where I need to be, not just on the entire estimate, but on each work area as well. Every work area can be analyzed for how much profit we're making and what our break even is as well. Now let's say the customer, while we're presenting the estimate, takes a look and says, it's good, but it's a little over our budget. We'd like to cut something out. We'd like to do the lighting later. Now, rather than going back to the office and reworking a whole new estimate, LMN, don't forget, is in the cloud. So we can fire up our laptop, come over here to the hold section, and put that backyard lighting on hold. By putting a work area on hold, you exclude this work area from the pricing in the contract. So anything in terms of prices or costs that was in the backyard lighting will now be eliminated from this estimate. I can go back to my customer proposal and hit print. And now I've printed them a new proposal that doesn't have the backyard lighting involved. That said, I can keep my backyard lighting in that estimate so that if they come back next year and decide to go ahead with it, it's already been priced with exactly the price that I originally quoted them. Now, sometimes the customer may come back and say, well, so-and-so said they'd do it for less. In that case, you might want to use one of the other versions of our proposals that come shipped with the system. Some proposals show little information, some show all the information, and some show something in between. Here I might typically customer proposal show materials. And when I print that estimate, what I'll get is a version of the proposal that I just sent them. However, it'll list all the materials for each work area. Now I could go back to the customer and say, well, our price is our price, and it's a fair price based on the cost of this job. However, ask your other contractor to break down the list of materials they're going to install for you for the price that they've quoted you, and make sure you're comparing an apples to apples comparison. If he's giving you the same quantities of materials and of the same quality that I'm giving you, then the choice is up to you. But if you're getting shorted because his price is less, then you deserve to know that before you make your final decision. Hopefully, you'll expose the shortcomings in the other contractor, who, in many cases, didn't put much effort into pricing the job at all and kind of picked it out of midair. When we win the job, we can go down here and we can look at the report called the Job Planner. And the Job Planner is designed to be produced for the crews. So by clicking Job Planner, I'll open it up here. And you can see I've got a plan for the crews that don't include any cost and price information, but takes all the information that was in the estimator's head and puts it into information that can be used by the crews. I've got my back patio up here, the cost code that I want our time and material expenses accounted for, the small tool checklist, the order of operations, and then all the hours and equipment and material quantities that we built into the estimate. That way, the foreman, when they go to do this job, not only know what they're doing in general, but they know exactly how the estimator saw this job being a success, how long the job should take, what equipment that they thought of when they were bidding the job, and the quantities and colors of the materials they should be expecting to receive on site. And when this happens, we can really start ramping up the profitability of our landscape company, because now foremen can take accountability for the successful execution of the job. If we're just dropping our foreman off on site, randomly painting some lines around the backyard and telling them this is what we want, there's an excellent chance that job is going to take a lot longer than we expected, and materials will be forgotten. And when it comes time to remember to get equipment to site when it should be there, everybody looks around and shrugs their shoulders and waits for the owner to pull all the strings to make this job happen on time. By coming up with a clear job plan that, again, doesn't necessarily have to include costs and prices, the job plan communicates to the entire company what success looks like on this job. And if you get the job done in these amount of hours with this equipment and these material quantities, i.e. if the estimate is right, then you can reasonably expect to make a profit because you know your costs and overhead and profit have been accounted for in your estimate. What we'll do after this is import that job into LMN Time so that we can track that job in real time, real life, hour-to-hour updates to make sure that we're on track to get that job done for profit. And of course, you can do the same thing for maintenance contracts. Here I could build a maintenance contract for a customer, including spring cleanup, lawn mowing, and fall cleanup. And inside each work area, there's going to be a list of the labor and equipment and possibly materials required to get it done. Now, lots of our members have asked in the past, I've got standard pricing by square footage, or I've got pricing by lot size, which is okay if you want to do it that way. However, be warned, most of our customers, after plugging in their budget and working out their maintenance pricing, find out between 20 to 40% of their jobs aren't making them any money, which is a tough pill to swallow if you're trying to make money at maintenance. There's different proposals for maintenance and can show different types of work like contract pricing, per visit pricing, per season pricing, and even time and material rates if you're going to do some of your work by hourly or by units like by yard of mulch. Otherwise, maintenance estimates work pretty much the same way. They've got your components, your labor, equipment, materials, and subs. They make sure each estimate recovers the hours that it needs. But most importantly, you then have the hours to hold the crews accountable. We need to get these jobs done in this amount of time in order to make the money that you expect. You can also even create templates for service estimates. So here, for example, I've built a template, and I've even called it that, maintenance template for small residential. Down here, I'll set up my standard work for a small residential maintenance contract. And then anytime I want to bid a job for a small residential, I go up here and I hit Save as New. I put the real customer's information in, and it creates an instant copy of this estimate that I can use to price a real customer's job. By creating a small, medium, and large residential, and possibly a small, medium, and large commercial, I can take care of 80% of the work it takes when putting together an estimate. All I need to do is go in there and tweak the times and possibly the materials to fit the specs of that particular job. But before we get there, let's just take a quick look at one of the other key areas of LMN estimating, which is our systems library. Underneath the systems library menu, you're going to find hundreds of policies, procedures, and checklists that we built in our own landscape company to keep things running smoothly. Here, for instance, under the administration systems, human resource procedures, I've got all kinds of folders that relate to human resources. So whether I'm looking to do a performance evaluation for my staff or recruiting and hiring, and I want to see a proper order of operations for recruiting or an employment contract, or I want an interview question form, or whether I want job descriptions for posting, all these things come included in LMN's systems version. LMN's startup version doesn't include any of the forms and documents you see here. The startup version has no monthly commitment, so you can sign up for a month and cancel the next month, and you're okay. The systems version comes with a 1-year commitment, meaning that you still pay monthly, but you commit to staying on for LMN for a year. And in return, we give you 700 Word documents that include systemized approaches to everything from hiring to selling to managing your fleet, health and safety, and far more. Thousands of hours were spent in our own landscape operations, building and constructing these checklists and policies and procedures to help our company run smoother. And now, as an LMN member, they're yours to download, customize for your own benefit, and keep forever. Let's jump ahead now to LMN Time to see how we can make sure this job gets done on time and on budget. LMN Time is far more than just a time tracking or payroll tool. LMN Time is really a job management tool that happens to also do payroll. The goal of LMN Time is to track time for our employees so that we can pay them accurately. However, the goal is to track their time back to a job, project, or task, whether it's a customer or internal job, so that we know where every single one of our hours is getting spent, and so that we can stay on top at any time of day or night of our work that's happening in the field and see exactly that things are going as planned or not. Let's take a look at that last job as a starting point. Here I'm going to go to Jobs, and once I've built that estimate, I can import that estimate into LMN Time to set it up for time tracking. To do so, I'll go down here and I'll click Import, and then I'll search for the job that we just created. There's Chuck and Denise Neville with their backyard pool and garden, and I'm going to bring that into LMN Time. Here it brings in a bunch of tasks. Some are from the estimate, and some are default tasks that I've created to automatically get added to the job. For instance, I may want to track things like changes and extras, or material deliveries, or project management time, And these things I didn't necessarily include on the estimate. I've set these up as default tasks so that they automatically get included in all my jobs, but I can choose now whether I want to import those or not on this specific job. Here are the other tasks for the job, but note backyard lighting wasn't ticked off. And it wasn't ticked because we had put the backyard lighting on hold before we imported it here. I'm going to import this job now, and what it'll do is create for me a job and customer description. It'll geocode the latitude and longitude so that when my crews are clocking in and out of this job, I'll be able to make sure they were either at the job or very close to it when they did so. And then if I go to the tasks, you'll see that each task I set up in my estimate comes over as a task for time tracking in LMN Time, so that when my crews clock into this job, they'll have to organize their time by pool or patio or garden. Now in this case, I had two sections of the job. I had a back patio section that had an economy paver and a back patio with a premium paver. And maybe this is too detailed. I don't necessarily need my crew to split their time between the economy and the premium paver. I just want to know how long the back patio took. So I can tick these two tasks off and down here hit merge. And merge will allow me to create one line item called back patio using the hardscape and cost code and the total number of hours for both these tasks. This is a really important step to get accurate job costing. Sometimes we give the customer a fair amount of detail when we're giving them a proposal, but that level of detail is far too great when you're asking your crews to break up the time. Let's face it, the last thing we want is the foreman pulling out his phone every minute and switching what task he's working on so that he can keep accurate job costing for his crew. Now I've got a simpler list of tasks, and this will be a much easier list to manage for my foreman, but also gives me enough information to know where we went right and possibly where we went wrong on the estimate. If this job had stuff that was billed by the hour, we could also set up hourly rates. Or if I wanted to track whether things got finished, I could also set up activities for this job that would allow me to do that as well. Once I've got the job tracked, my crews in the field are ready to clock into the job. So using any smartphone, crews could go to the timesheet section. Now they won't see as much information as we're seeing here on the screen. This is for you, the administrator. Crews can basically do two things: configure the people in their crew that day and add timesheets. The goal of LMN Time is to also have the foreman fill out the timesheet for his entire crew so that you don't have to have a smartphone in the hands of all your employees and you don't need to approve 3 or 4 timesheets for each crew, especially when all their time would be the same. The crew clocks in like this. In the morning, they create a timesheet and it'll automatically pick the date for them. When their timesheet starts, down here they're going to click clock in. And in the morning, they might first clock into the yard and shop for work they did around there. That's okay. Down here, they'll clock into shop. So even though it's not a customer job, crews could clock into a job called shop, which is your job. Then they'd identify who's in their crew that day. So these 3 employees showed up as automatically highlighted because I, as a foreman, had them set up as my default crew. But it doesn't mean I'm stuck with them. If Greg's off sick today and we take Dave instead, it's an easy switch. Clicking next brings me to the task. So it knows what job we're working on. Now it's asking me what task are we doing? Loading, unloading, and driving, yard and equipment maintenance, deliveries and pickups, and meetings. So you set up the task that you want to track for the shop, and then your crews will be forced to pick one of those tasks to allocate their time to. I'll say we're all loading, unloading, and driving, and we'll hit next. Now it pulls the date and the time from the timesheet. I'm filming this video in the afternoon, and normally we'd be clocking in the morning, so I'll do that. Now I'm doing this on purpose because a foreman is free to set their time whenever is accurate. And sometimes they're going to forget to clock into the job and they may have to go back and set it differently than it actually was. They'll have the ability to do that. However, you'll also have the ability to see what time it was when they did it and where they were standing when they did that. So that if you have foremen who are constantly adjusting their timesheets, you know that something's going on and should probably be investigated. So we start at the morning at 7:35, and I can start employees at different times as well. If you have a foreman who starts earlier and then the other 2 employees start later, that's fine. LMN Time can handle that as well. We just repeat the same process for the employees after we've done the foreman in the morning. Now let's pretend we're all moving to our first job. You don't need to clock out of the shop. You simply need to go down here and clock into the job that you're working on now. I'll jump to that Neville Pool and Water feature job and hit next. And we'll clock in Dave and Marcus and Mike to that job as well. Now it asks us, are we working on the swimming pool, the back patio, the lighting, or the garden? Only the tasks that we chose to get set up on the job are going to show up here. Let's say we're working on the swimming pool. I'll hit next. And then I'm going to again pick the date and time. So the date and time will default to the phone's date and time. But once again, just to make this realistic, I'm going to back this up to the morning and pretend we got to the job at 8:41. Now you can see my crew is clocked into the Neville Water feature. So we were at the shop loading and unloading from 7:35 to 8:41. And then from 8:41, and the out time is blank, which means we're still clocked in, we've been working on the swimming pool and water feature. Now remember, when we set up the Neville pool, we set up an estimated hours for that pool. So how does the crew know whether they're on track or not? Well, they can click the magnifying glass here, and they can see we've estimated 450 hours, and we've used up 18.15 already, which means we're 4% used up the hours that have been estimated. LMN Time gives the crew and the office a live, real-time update of the exact estimated versus actual man hours on the job. In this case, I've had 3 guys clocked in from 8:41 in the morning, and right now it's about 2:38 in the afternoon. So totaling up all those man hours tells us that we've now used 18.2 man hours on this job to date, and we're still 4% done. As the day increases, so too will the actual hours and the status complete. But it gives the crew the ability, without having to ask for any questions or have any company meetings or be handed any reports, your foreman will have the ability to see exactly where they stand on the job to help them manage the job getting done on time. At the end of the day, the crew will clock out using the clock out button. And again, they can clock out different people at different times. That's not an issue. I'll clock out here at 2:38. We'll call it an early day, and we'll say today we worked on the excavation. Now you can require task notes at the end of every day, or you can not require them. It's up to you. It's an option you can turn off or on. I prefer them on because it gives me a picture of what the crews did each day. Now when they click save, they've got one more step left, and that's to submit the timesheet. Right now this timesheet is showing up as in progress, meaning for the foreman, they're still working on it. When the foreman's done, they're going to go down here and they're going to click submit. And now it'll try to automatically apply a lunch deduction for the time and duration they took lunch. So if we broke at 12:30 for 30 minutes, I'll approve that and hit submit. Now it'll show for the foreman the in time, out time, and total hours for each employee on the timesheet. And then when they click save, they'll be able to submit that to the office. What the office sees the next day is something like this. They'll go timesheet, approve time, and there's that timesheet I just filled out, ready for review and approval because its status is submitted. However, if you see this little red pen here, it indicates that the foreman has made some manual edits to the actual date and time. So I can click the audit button, and the audit button shows me that the foreman, which in this case was me in this video, clocked in at 7:35, but it was really 2:35 in the afternoon. If I click the maps button, I can see exactly where that foreman was when they did this clock in and out. Once in a while, it's going to happen. Your foremen are going to forget to clock in or out when they should have. And so they can fix it on live in their timesheets. However, when they do that, you're going to be well aware of exactly what time it really was and where the foreman was really standing when they did that. So no more sitting at the coffee shop and saying you were at the job. If I flip back to the jobs now, I'll be able to open the Neville job and see exactly where we stand for each task. And if I click the review button here, you'll see that the swimming pool so far had 16 out of 450 hours completed to date, which means it's 3% done, and the estimated hours are 590 out of 16.4. As an estimator or project manager, I now have the power to click on any estimate that we're working on and then hit the review button to see exactly where we stand in terms of estimated versus actual hours across all the work that should happen on that job, total estimated, total actual hours for the whole job, and then down here, a link to every timesheet that's ever been filled out against this job. For those of you doing maintenance and service work, you'll actually also be able to open a job and go to the history button. And if I want a history of my snow plowing and salting activity, I can click this button and there's every date and time that we visited the job for snow plowing, the date we were there, the supervisor that did it or the foreman that did the work, any comments they left, the weather, and any activities that they noted. You can set your jobs up for activities so that you can track things that are over and above just time. What we showed you in the simple timesheet a few minutes ago was just how foremen clock in and out for their time. But oftentimes we want more information from that back from the field. For instance, you may want to know if they put down mulch or they put down salt in the wintertime. You can create a job and also create things called activities. Here I've got a maintenance contract and I want to track how many bags of fertilizer the crew put down, how much mulch they put down, or if they installed flats of annuals, that they did that work so that I can bill it. Crews won't see the rates that you're charging. They'll simply be prompted when clocking out, did you put down any of these three things? They'll tick off yes that they did. If the track quantity is on, they'll enter the number that they did, and then LMN can generate a report that shows for you exactly what work got done at what sites. LMN Time also comes with a scheduling application. And under the scheduling application, you can schedule your work on different days for different crews and also get a picture of the work assigned to each crew each day. For instance, if I jump the whiteboard ahead to Monday, I can see here all the work that's been assigned to my crews to date. Install B crew has 2 jobs assigned to it. That's not going to work. So I'll grab one job and I'll drag it over here to install crew A. Now they'll be assigned to do that job on that day, and install B will be on a different job. I've got one over here sitting and unassigned, and maybe I want my Hort crew to do that. So same thing, I'll just drag and drop it over to my Hort crew. And you can see at the top, it shows the estimated hours scheduled for each crew in each day. My lawn crew has 8 hours and 47 minutes worth of work, so I know they've got a full day here. When they clock in on their timesheet, if they click scheduled, it will show my crew a list of jobs that have been assigned for them that day, and then they can just pick their times from that list of jobs. You can also use the optimize routes button to set up an optimized route. So here I've got the 3 jobs they need to hit. When I click optimize routes, it'll put it in the best driving order based on Google Maps. I'll hit save changes and the schedule will update based on the changes that I've saved so that the job sites will now show up on the crew's timesheet in the order I want the work done. When the crew finishes the job in the field, they'll also get asked a question. Did you complete this work or not? When they say they completed the work will then show up as complete, and it will track the date and the foreman that marked it as complete. Live on your schedule board, you'll see a check mark ticked off to indicate that work was done as completed. And also on all schedule reporting and job reporting, you'll see that that scheduled visit was completed on said day by said foreman, depending on who did the job and when. Lots of other things you can do with LMN Time. Because it's cloud-based and because everything in LMN Time is real-time, not only are we tracking the hours for the crew, but we can also stay on top of day-to-day operations. And because LMN Time is a live, real-time time tracking software, everything the crews are doing in the field is instantly transmitted back to the office for up-to-the-minute information about all the jobs. So as crews clock in and out of jobs, you'll see who's been where. And I can go to Timesheets and latest activity to see this. It'll actually show me which foreman clocked in at what time, and in a click of a button, I can view the timesheet as they fill it out. I can also go to my jobs menu and go to job site history to see job information as it happens. So if I get a call from a customer about were you here today or were you here last night, in a couple clicks of the mouse, my office staff can view that, which is important for keeping my overhead lean and mean. Or if I click on the staff menu, I can turn on the daily dashboard and see where each employee has been all day. For instance, I can click Dave Barr here and see, well, he clocked in at 7:35 until 8:41 he was at the shop. And then he was working at the Neville pool from 8:41 to 2:38. That's the timesheet we just filled out moments ago on our screen. As your crew fills it out live, you'll see the information live being transmitted back to your screen. And at the end of all this, you can go to reports and you can generate reports for payroll that indicate each employee's hours, and that'll include calculations for overtime, etc. You can also run job reports to see how many hours were spent by job. You can run billing reports to see if you had hours that were billable, like time and material work, reports for that, or how to bill for activities that were completed, like mulch installed or salt applied. Scheduling reports show us the number of visits that were completed and not completed by job. And the dashboard gives us a big picture of all the jobs that we currently have in progress and what the estimated versus actual hours are. A really handy warboard, if you will, to show you your current status of all your jobs. For those of you using payroll software, there's an exports menu that'll generate export files for paychecks and ADP payroll for those of you who have those systems that do support import-export. Not all their versions do, so check with your payroll provider that they do. LMN also includes an Excel payroll export, which integrates with many payroll vendors. If they can import payroll information from a spreadsheet or CSV file, we're generating that payroll information in that format to allow LMN time information to import into many different payroll software settings. If you use QuickBooks, LMN Time will sync with QuickBooks automatically. So behind the scenes, it'll send all the hours as well as the jobs that were worked on into QuickBooks so that not only can QuickBooks Payroll pay your employees, but that every minute of the employee's time will get job costs to the jobs that the employees worked on during those times. So that right out of QuickBooks, I can see a to-the-penny accurate breakdown of what I spent in labor on every job in my company, including shop and office time. You know it's going to be to-the-penny accurate because it's going to be exactly the same data that was used to generate the paychecks for the employees. And unless an employee forgets to clock themselves in, you know your payroll report's going to be accurate. The nice thing about having a job costing system that relies on payroll is that LMN Time uses payroll and job costing together as an advantage. In many systems, you've got a punch card system where employees punch in and out on a punch card and then write their hours on a piece of paper for job costing. And what inevitably happens is that the punch clock is right because that's how the employees get paid. And then they write whatever they feel like writing on a piece of paper, which is usually full of mistakes and inaccuracies. Here, using LMN Time, we've created a system that does job costing from the payroll information. Employees are going to track their time correctly because they want to get paid for the hours that they worked. But because every hour they worked gets tracked back to a task, QuickBooks or whatever your job costing system can tell you exactly what it cost on every task, on every job in labor. And LMN Time can always produce reports in terms of up-to-the-minute labor hours on every job and task so that you know exactly where you stand at any time of any day. That draws us to the end of our 10,000-foot overview of the LMN estimating, budgeting, and time tracking system. If you have any questions in regards to what you've seen, you can head over to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/LMNvideo and see all kinds of videos of the software in action. There's hundreds of hours of information to watch there. Or maybe you have questions. And if you have questions, feel free to email us at support@golmn, that's GOLMN.com, and we'll be more than happy to get back to you with the answers that you have. Thanks all for spending a few minutes of your valuable time with us today, and we hope to hear from you again in the near future.